Hey everybody, give me 1 second here to check on something. Can you guys hear my audio? There should be a little chat room in the YouTube channel. Can you guys hear me? There's a little bit of a delay on the chat, so just give me a sec. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, this is first time setting up the audio, so I just want to make sure it's working. So can you hear me? Okay, I see who's here. All right, cool. Okay, so first of all, this whole presentation is going to be archived. So if for some reason you get booted or aren't able to watch the whole thing, it'll be up as soon as it's done streaming, so you can watch it whenever or share it with other people. But first of all, my name is Samuel Lopez Victoria. Some of you might know me already. I help run Interactive Initiative with my wife. We are a not-for-profit where we look to help, mentor, and give platforms to artists that want to or are working in interactive art or don't even know how to get into the interactive arts. And we act as kind of a halfway point as well as a stepping stone for artists to be able to get ideas that they want, and we're there to able to help them, as well as do cool events and a bunch of other stuff. So today I'm gonna actually be doing this kind of officially our first real stream. So yay! It's gonna be it's part of a series that we're doing that I'm calling At Home ++. So while you guys are stuck at home, you can kind of learn how to do some new things, learn how to work with circuits, or learn how to program, or even just learn about something that would be informative to help you as an artist or enable you to be able to do some pretty cool stuff. So rather than just keep rambling on, I'm going to get through this. So today, I hope you're here for the contemporary medium, an artist's guide to video games, and basically I'm going to be presenting a bunch of games as well as a bunch of ideas and creators and places where you can kind of deep dive into kind of an artist's perspective or a source of things that will actually help you as an artist by either playing video games or jumping into the culture or understanding it from an informed perspective. So, moving on, let's see, actually let me get, all right. So, like I said, my name is Samuel Lopez Victoria. I'm also an artist. If you want to see what I do, you can go to my website, which is just myname.com. You can check out what I do there. I work primarily in interactive programming as my medium, and we're going to get into a little bit of why that is such a special thing. So first of all, talking about video games, the best thing to do is to actually understand what makes up a game, what makes it unique and interesting. Why would you want to work with it as an artist? What about it is going to actually help you in your artist career or your idea that you're trying to get across? These different aspects I'm going to be talking about are actually not necessarily the only parts of a game, but the parts that I find unique about video games in particular. That can be applied also to tabletop games or other types of games. So jumping into that, so first of all, with with video games, they function in what you call real time. So when you see something on the screen or a device, or even if it's a circuit board with like lights or something happening where a motor goes off, all those things are happening in real time. And what that means is that as you're seeing it happening, it's also being made in that time. So like the computer is creating all the graphics that you're seeing on the screen. It's processing the information that it's getting from the person playing it. And then it's feeding back, and it's continually, it's never ending until you actually like stop the program or turn the computer off, where it's continually like creating what you're seeing nonstop the whole time. It's never static. It's always happening in the moment. Another aspect that is primarily my favorite aspect of video games is that they're responsive and they're sensing. So they, you pick up a controller or a joystick and you press left and the character goes left, or it can be something as much as like I sit on a chair and then suddenly all these things happen. So like a physical chair, it could be you sneezing into a plant, and that plant has some sort of thing connected to the game that then has a response of how it reacts. And then in the program itself, it has different aspects that react to your sensing. So when you're doing an action, then the game responds to your action, depending on a number of factors that I'm going to be talking about. I think actually this piece that you're seeing here, this is called, I think, Boing Garden or something. It's like those little, when you close the door and it has that spring that like prevents you from slamming the door too hard. It's a whole thing made of that, and you actually like little springs, and it creates like a little pulsing wave that hits the other springs with like a little rainbow. But it's actually a game that a couple of interactive museums have up that you can play. So those two things, the real time, the responsive and the sensing aspects of it, make it then all kind of come together and create this thing that's experiential. So as opposed to you go see a movie and it's very much a passive type of participation where you're watching it and you're seeing it from the outside, or you have this like this thing that is separate from you and just keeps going by itself, where you don't have to have any input or say. Games in particular are unique in that you don't see them passively. You actually experience them, and that can have a stronger effect on the person playing than they would if they watched a movie, primarily because they come at it from the experiential aspect where they actually did these things and basically had a moment or memory that tied to that they created is a part of them, as opposed to a thing that they saw or read or looked at in some way. So they actually have their hand, and it becomes a part of them in this whole experience that they're having. Then another aspect that is really unique to games that I think some artists really play with is the idea of rules. In order for a game to function, primarily because most of it is done through programming, where there needs to be logic in some way. The great thing is that whoever is creating the game, so the artist, sets rules. So you just because you might get something that is telling you to make a game in a very, very realistic setting, that doesn't mean that you have to stick to those rules. You're able to make the rules that you want for yourself for whatever it is that this game has. So you could have like the room that I'm in right now, like my living room. I could sit on a couch, but that doesn't mean it would have to be soft. It could suddenly just like melt into liquid, and then from there, that liquid then becomes something else that then creates some new rules then based on how it interacts with the floor or what you do as a player. So you can get as abstract or as grounded as you want in reality. And I think that's kind of where the artist's touch kind of comes in, is where they create rules that then the player has to understand and work with in order to manipulate that space in the game world. And then based on those rules, the video games can then be generative or procedural. So to kind of like break that down, that's mostly like the game's artificial intelligence. It's kind of something that figures things out for itself. You can do this thing called procedural, where you set some rules as the programmer, and then the game decides like what it needs to do based on those rules. So like create a room a certain way, or this world is populated in a number of ways because you set these rules to generate these things in a procedural way. And then the other aspect that just ties into everything else as well is it is a simulation, which makes it an experience, as well as like it's play and performative. So playing a game like literally is play, and play in some ways is described as what is it called? It's like learning through the act of copying. So like when children play, they copy their parents and learn through that, or like through the things that they see, and they try to replicate that through play, and it's how they understand things. So it's experiential. It also like presents the opportunity for people that don't normally get to play to be able to play, or give them an excuse to play. So I think that's pretty awesome. Okay, so now getting into the actual bulk of this whole thing. So a large number of games I'm going to fly through. First, I'm going to highlight a bunch of different game creators that have created some really unique games, and have like a library that is very consistent with what they do. Some of them see themselves as artists, others see themselves as purely like as game designers, but I think like in some ways they work in both the art and game industry standards that I think they follow some interesting topics in a number of ways. So to start us off, there's one game designer. His name is Goichi Suda. He also goes by Suda51. He's created a number of games that have to do with a lot of obscure and typically taboo topics, primarily with the idea he's been focusing on for the past over about 10 years, this idea of characters having to consistently kill their past. And the only way they can like move forward into their future is by killing all parts of what created their past and who they are. So they've created the Silver Case. This picture is of Killer 7, which is about an assassin who has split personalities and has like these strange ties with like demons called Heaven Smiles that are then like also tied to the U.S. government. It's like it's all over the place, but it goes along with the idea of the creator. He says that he has like his design aesthetic in terms of like how he creates games is he wants to create games very punk, so it's very anti-game. A lot of these games don't play great, but they very much don't feel like anything else that you've ever played or have seen. This is from the game Flower, Sun, and Rain. It's basically Groundhog's Day, except if you mix it with like a hotel full of people like in the afterlife, as well as somebody who consistently is getting blown up and trying to figure out why he is. And then this is Let It Die, which is this online game that you actually play a game inside of a game to play another game to then be able to scale the Tower of Babel. But I'll let you guys look at that one yourselves. Then there's SWERY. He tends to look to do things with the idea of like the mundane life accompanied by kitschiness, as well as like absurdity in a lot of ways. He's very much influenced by the Twin Peaks. with what you see here, the Deadly Premonition. It's a very B-movie, a lot of the things he does. It's also very, like, comforting at the same time and creepy. It never seems like anything is consistent other than, like, how strange and, like, uncomfortable the entire games are, like, each of the games are. One of his most recent ones is this one called The Missing J.J. Macfield and the Island of Memories, where it has to do with this woman who's searching for her lost friend on this strange island, where it actually ends up that the only way the character can actually interact with the world is by self-harming herself and in like a really grotesque way, but the game doesn't like actually glorify it. It makes it pretty horrifying, and you have to do it often. And the game actually like explores this whole history with this character of self-mutilation that she's like slowly uncovering along with finding her friend. Then there's Fumito Ueda. He's created Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and Last Guardian. A lot of his games have to do with like a very somber tone, usually with the idea of loss. Usually the main character is either like kicked out of society or abandoned, or in other situations a character that has to sacrifice things that are very loved in some ways or unknowingly loved in order to do something very selfish. So there's this very consistent idea of loss throughout all of his games. Then there's Tetsuya Mizuguchi. He primarily works with the idea of synesthesia. Let me say that again. Synesthesia. Can't say it. A lot of his games focus on the idea of like where you connect different senses to each other. So like you can taste sound or smell color. Where here he uses music, where you actually can feel through vibration the music as well as see it. So all your actions actually line up with different things that you're doing in the game. So everything you do in the game that has an effect on what you're seeing as well as like what you're feeling. He even created different like little devices to connect to the games to then like further even more. Recently he came out with Tetris, where he custom made. Well, no, it's not Tetris. The previous game, the one you saw before, Rez, where you wear this full bodysuit that actually like vibrates in very, very unique little spots all over your whole body. Then there's Hideo Kojima. A lot of people are probably familiar with his stuff. He recently came out with Death Stranding. He normally does the Metal Gear Solid series and has moved on from that. A lot of his ideas have to do with the idea of like philosophy, the philosophy of war, as well as what the consequences of death. There's a lot of controversy also how he handles a lot of topics. So like I wouldn't say he's somebody to entirely dive into because there's a lot of questionable things with his practice in terms of like the content he's creating. But he still presents a lot of ideas that most of the game industry as well as film hasn't really touched on. So I recommend you check him out, especially if you have thoughts about war or just the idea of philosophy. Then on the flip side of all that, to get a little bit happier, there's Keita Takahashi. He created Katamari Damacy, where you're this little alien boy basically that you push around this this ball to gather people up into the ball, and then you create new stars in the world that your drunk dad actually destroyed. It's a very fun game. Like it comes from the idea of play. He then went on to create Nabi Nabi Boy, which you see here, which is then also like went on to create like these worlds that are like procedurally generated that that the only thing you do is stretch and play. And then recently came out with Watum, where you play, and that it's more play. And the Watum was, I think, influenced by his seeing his kids play, and he just wanted to create something that would allow people to go back to a very young age in terms of like what that time of play means, and like giving the people the chance to be able to experience that again. Then there's Yoshiro Kimura. He has a very like oddly consistent and inconsistent style of working. All his games are very unique in terms of they're very comedic in a very strange and an unusual way. Like Lack of Love, I think, is one that you're an alien who inhabits a planet, but you don't like, you're literally very alien, where it's not, the actions you do are non-human. The most human thing you do is urinate on things that you walk by, and you have to kind of figure it out for yourself in terms of how you work it. So he does a very wide range of different types of games. I'm not going to go into depth about it, but I would recommend you check it out, especially if you're interested in the idea of humor. Then there's also the Yoot Saito, which he creates a lot of games having to do with communication, where the games actually use a microphone, where most of them you're raising creatures that you actually communicate, and they remember conversations that you had in the past. You get to know these creatures, and they get to know you, and over time you actually learn of their history, and they learn of your history, and you kind of grow this like bond. I wouldn't necessarily that it's always successful, but it's doing things that most other things are not really exploring. As well as you get to talk to a fish with a human face on it, which I think is pretty great. Then there's the works of Lucas Pope. He's done this one called Papers, Please, and recently returned to Obra Dinn. A lot of it has to do with games working with like typical government work, where Papers, Please, you're basically like it's similar to like the Berlin Wall, except you're the person that has to check the people passing through and check if there's any discrepancies on their information or not, while at the same time you are sacrificing your family if you're helping like the insurgency do things that to help their cause. So you have like the risk and reward of helping the resistance, but also like your family can basically die too at the same time if you help too much. He's got some interesting things. I think if you're looking at something that has to do with like political work or being stuck in situations that are part of a job that you don't necessarily agree with, I think you should check this one out. Then there's also the artist Zach Gage. I'm not going to get into what he does, but he makes a lot of mobile applications where he takes older games that we're used to, like chess or solitaire, and changes the rules, not necessarily to modernize them, but to like give us a different perspective on the way that we are playing games, and give us the tools to be able to reframe our thought process in terms like on how we want to play these games, as opposed to how we normally would. So then getting into the actual specific games, there's Getting Over It with Bennett, Foddy. This is a very much, if you're into the idea, like for your art practice, like if you like the making fun of the viewer, or like trolling is another word for that. This entire game is all about that, where you're this character, I think based on a Greek god or philosopher, I forget, that is, the only way you can traverse the whole game is by being in the bucket and using this hammer to get around. And the game is very impossibly hard, and through the whole process, the actual designer of the game is like both mocking you and praising you through the whole thing, but in a very like poetry reading type of way. And and if you actually beat the game, it connects you with the designer, and he talks with you. There's a couple interesting videos about this I can link to a little bit later, but I think it causes frustration, but that's the entire purpose of the game. Then there's Thumper, where it's a very simple idea, but it's like similar to the Tetsuya Mizuguchi games, where they're having to do with synesthesia, and that where he was working more with rhythm. Thumper takes the same idea, except it focuses on violence. The designers have called it rhythm violence, where you, through play and through feedback of what you're seeing on the screen, it actually is a game that is not meant to relax you. It's more to get you in the zone, but I would say it's also something that gets you in a zone that is very stressful. So if you don't like stress, I would highly recommend not playing this. But if you like the idea of violence through physical means, this is, I think, a really good game to check out. There's also Depression Quest, which I'm not going to get super into. If you're familiar with Gamergate and the politics around that, this is kind of the source of all of where that came from. It was something that I think was a very genuine journal that was gamified, but turned into something that actually has affected the game industry to this day, for better and worse. But if you're interested in the origins of all that, and also like a personal perspective on depression that you can actually play through, I would say look at this game. So this one is pretty popular. It's named Undertale. It's created by Toby Fox. He's a musician as well as a game designer. He's created the whole game himself. You play this like androgynous character that's a human that falls into a hole that then befriends monsters that plays out like most old games that you would play on a Nintendo or Super Nintendo, where you can fight them. It's like a role-playing game, except you have the option to not fight certain enemies at all, and that actually affects your friendship as well as like the overall story of the game. And I think if you're interested in the idea or ideas of like inclusivity and also like thoughtfulness, I think this is a very good game to look at. I think it's all the best thing that's happened because of it is it's allowed a lot of people to open up their perspectives as well as try to understand other people that they normally wouldn't. So I think this is one worth checking out. I'm not going to say much about this. This is a free game you can get on your phone. It's called Hidden My Game by Mom. Again, this is another absurd game. You're just looking for your Nintendo DS that your mom hid, and I'm going to leave it at that. So just check that out. Then there's Hypnospace Outlaw. This has to do with a very specific time in the 90s internet when it was kind of like a Wild West where anything goes, and you kind of act as an investigator where you literally just web browse, but everything is set up in a very early 90s type of vibe, except this internet that you're working through is connected through people sleeping. I think it kind of like frames very specific moments of a young like public internet that I think if you've never experienced if you were not around during the time that the 90s internet was around, this is kind of a good looking glass into it. And if you were, I think this is also like kind of a good way to revisit it as well as understand it in a funny but like also very very accurate way of looking at things. Then there's Gone Home. I played this initially thinking that it was actually going to be a horror game because you end up going back. You're this girl or lady that comes home to find her parents are gone and her sister and everything. and you slowly learn about like what's happened with this family, primarily with your younger sister. It's actually a very beautiful game. It has to do with a love story between your sister and this other girl that slowly unravels the more you like learn about the house. The only reason why I took it as a horror game too is because all the lights were out in the building. It was like thundering, and it freaked me out. And every time I had to like walk down a dark hall just to turn a little light switch on. Give me a sec. Then there's Firewatch. The actual like look of this game was designed by I'm not sure if he's a graphic designer or a printmaker, but he gave the color palette and look to this game that it has. You play a park ranger who does Firewatch in a tower that you actually like look. It starts out very mundane and turns into something else later on. But the overall theme of it is this one thing that I don't think is talked about too much, and I feel like there's a lot of opportunities for where it's highlighting male vulnerability. It's something a lot of men don't talk about, I think, and it kind of makes it, the game creates almost like a safe space by using its own story to talk about how men have that vulnerability as well. Then there's this one which I still have yet to play because it's a harsh reality. It's actually a documentary of a game. It's this family that is coping with their infant son who was born with cancer. The biggest thing, and this is kind of a warning as well as something just to be aware of in terms of like what the focus of this is that the family is like a very very heavily Christian, and even though I know like even if it's not part of your beliefs or you don't agree with the ideas of Christianity, the unique thing that this game does is that the family is very open. Like they actually have things that you interact with as well as listen to recorded conversations that the family had. It's a very honest look into their faith as a family. And besides documentaries, I would say like that is something that is very hard to convey in a game. So even if you don't agree with it, if you're looking at the ideas of like how people stay to their faith, even through probably the harshest moments, I think this is a really, I wouldn't say necessarily beautiful, but I think a very, very direct look into how some people that rely on their faith to get through certain topics. Also, be prepared. If you do play this, you are guaranteed to cry, and that is why I still have yet to play this. Then there's Kentucky Route Zero. I think it's taken over 7 to 9 years to complete this because it was released in different chapters. It's about this underground road called the Kentucky Route Zero. It has to do a lot with the supernatural and about like old stories and like ghosts and you becoming part of the story, as well as playing multiple characters that then like decide what that story is supposed to mean. Like it's not necessarily choice making, but it's more you giving context to the things that are happening in front of you. I think it's really interesting. It's got a very unique aesthetic look, and I definitely do recommend checking it out. I need to finish it, but it's very impactful, and it really knows how to spend time with like particular shots as well as like moments that really need to be focused on. Then there's Lisa, which is if you're into Mad Max or or violence or just the absurdity, Lisa is about a future that has where all the women in the world have died, and it's just a bunch of like horny older men that like don't know what to do with themselves, and are trying to figure out what life means when everything's been destroyed. But you also then act as this character that finds this girl and raises her, and one day she disappears. I know that sounds like probably like a lot of movies that have been released, but the funny thing is this is actually a dark comedy, and it's pretty funny when it's supposed to be dark, and I think it's doing some interesting things there with that. And yeah, I don't know, if you're really into dark humor or things that are funny that normally shouldn't, this is something definitely worth checking out. Then there's the Stanley Parable. Stanley Parable is basically taking the idea of what narrative means and turning it into something that, actually, let me take that back. It's taking the narrative of video games and where normally games allow you to have like multiple choices. This game does the same thing, but it presents situations where the game starts to try to make you go a certain way, and you as a player want to not do what it's telling you, and the game reacts to you based on that. It has this really well narrated part of the game, which is the entirety of the game. It's mostly the narrator, where he's kind of talking about what you're doing. And there's some really nice little surprises in there. It's also a comedy game as well. But if you're looking at what narrative means and like linearity, if like how does that even apply? Like what is linearity? What is branching choices? Then Stanley Parable is something you should be looking at. There's Proteus, really simple. This is a game about relaxation where everything in the world creates music. So you can sit down and like listen to a tree while little frogs come by and actually sing to you. Then there's Superhot, which is a lot of people will say it's the Matrix because you can like slow down time and you walk around things. But really, the idea of this game is about control. Like as soon as you start feeling like you have very good control of the game, then the game starts pointing you in directions where you feel like the game's controlling you. It actually makes you feel very terrible for that fact in an effective way, but it makes it fun in a very like dystopian, rebellious type of way. So I recommend checking this one out. This one is actually, the primary focus of this game is capitalism. It has a very cute image, but the overall theme in the game is that money and corporations have come in and want to take over every little like aspect of the world that you live in, and you're just kind of walking around and meeting people that have to deal with those things. The name of that game, I forgot to say, Pikuniku. Then there's Hotline Miami, which has to do with like I would say adrenaline and violence and disgust as well. So it's a super violent game. It also has very Miami vibes created by these two Swedish game designers. When you play it is very fast paced and makes you full of adrenaline because the music's going, the violence happening. When you play it, at least like for when I played it, it both like disgusts me as well as like makes me want to like keep pushing forward and want to be even more violent than I was before. It's a really strange feeling to have where you're disgusted and wanting to cause more pain. Then there's Bubsy 3D. Just go to bubsy3d.com. It's this video game character visits an art gallery. The whole thing is actually about art. Just check it out. It's worth a look, better than me explaining. Then there's Jazzpunk, which is if you've ever seen Airplane or The Naked Gun. This is where it's like primarily like sight gags, which is something very hard to do, especially in a game where like timing doesn't always like happen because the player can kind of choose when timing happens. This game, Jazzpunk, is almost the entirety of like sight gags, the Airplane and Naked Gun, kind of do, except in a game form. And it's really funny. Then there's Florence, which is about it's basically about a relationship and going through all the aspects of what a relationship means, but turns every part of it into like a gameplay element that plays differently depending on how or what you're doing in that relationship. It's really nice. It's charming, and like it doesn't take long to play. And it's on phones, I think. Then there's Her Story, where you literally are like a detective or just somebody with a computer screen and like 5 or 6 tapes full of like hours of video, and you're trying to figure out this murder, and you have these tapes of this one woman at different times that you interviewed her, and the only way that you can kind of like piece things together is by putting in keywords that you listen to as you're watching videos, and you're kind of doing an actual investigation and figuring it out. It's interesting. I think it does something unique with how they pace the story out. Okay, so those were a couple games. I know that was a lot. I'm gonna fly through some things you can like jump into then also that'll allow you to keep talking about games, or at least hear other people talking about them in topics that aren't just like, hey, this is games, and like, look, it's a new Mario. This is more like the ideas and concepts behind games. People are talking about them in unique ways as an artist that I think would help. First, there is, so Vice has a video game section. They do a thing called Waypoint Radio, where some scholars and some of the press come together and they sit and discuss some unique topics that are hot currently in gaming, as well as like certain issues that come up and that aren't typically talked about in the gaming culture, as well as like the world culture. There's also the Game Developer Conference Vault. You can visit the link that's here to like watch a bunch of videos of people talking about the process of making games, which doesn't mean like making 3D models or programming. It means like the ideas that they come across in making games, and like what works and what fails. It's almost like an artist lecture, except you're getting it from all different aspects of game design. Then there's Archipel. I think I'm saying that right. It's a YouTube series where they don't just do game designers, but they interview and follow and talk with a bunch of prominent game designers in Japan, as well as other like artists and designers. They have a really nicely made documentary series you can just kind of like put on and relax watching. It's really nice. The NYU Game Center has a bunch of guest lectures that they have people talking that you can watch. They have some really good stuff. There's Super Bunnyhop, which you can also look up. He has a lot to do with the game designer I mentioned before, Hideo Kojima, where he kind of highlights certain aspects that are controversial or like are relative to the real world in terms of like war or like traveling, a wide number of things. He's an interesting person. If you want like purely little documentaries on game designers, just to see their process, but also like get an inside look, there's a channel on YouTube called No Clip. They have like little half-hour documentaries, and they talk with people who make the games, and it's pretty good. There's a Cloth Map, which is this journalist goes around the world and sees how games actually have an impact on different parts of the world, how they're like culturally integrated into things. I think like recently he went to Brazil. In this picture, I think he's playing games in Mongolia. So I think it has some interesting things. There's this other channel on YouTube that's called What's So Great About That, where there's some really nice like thought processes and videos of just like talking through different topics in games, as well as like popular media. There's a Track Mode, which is just a blog that highlights a lot of obscurities in gaming that happen that most people don't talk about. They're just strange and kind of odd. I like this one that's just like a fashion show that was in a Japanese like arcade. And then there's Classics of Game. I just like throwing it on there because it's videos with no context, but are from games that when you see them, that makes less sense the more you watch them, which I think can be also informative to practice. So I'm going to fly through these two since I know this might be getting a little long. So the tools you can use, and most of these are free, or I'll tell you what they cost in terms of to be making games. And if you're interested in learning about these, or me even like doing a little workshop on these as well, feel free to leave a comment or say something about it if you want me to cover these. So artists are primarily work visually or kinesthetically, and you as an artist probably work more visually than with written, unless you're like a script writer or you know, whatever, like you write a book. Visual scripting is a way of programming where you actually see everything that you're making. You make little like flow charts, or you drag and drop stuff. It's a lot more friendly to the artist because they can see what they're doing as opposed to reading what they're doing. And sometimes reading for an artist, I think, is a bit harder than seeing visually like how everything is working. So most of these programs that I'm going to be showing use visual scripting in some way. The easiest one to get started with, I would say, is if you have a PlayStation 4, you can actually get this thing that just came out called Dreams, where you can program your own game and you can actually collaborate with other game designers to make your own 3D game with tools that are like super simple. You can even do 3D modeling. I recommend you look up videos on how this thing works because it's very impressive. Like it does such a wide range of styles and like very in-depth game design with tools that anybody and everybody like has access to, and it's super easy to use. Then there's Twine, which is very much like a choose your own adventure text-based thing, where you can make your own little text video games. You can get it downloaded online. At the link, I'm sorry, excuse me. There's Tyranno Builder, which I may do a workshop on in the future. I think it's $15, but if you know what a visual novel is, you use this tool to basically like create a little script where characters interact with each other. You can use this just because it's mostly built for like characters that have dialogue between each other. It doesn't mean you have to use it that way. You can use it for something else that would make sense as an artist, because you can have video, you can have interaction, you have choice making, and it's all easy to use and like understandable. Then there's Construct, which is, I use this to teach game programming to middle and high schoolers. This is usually what I start them with because how easy it is to make things. It's not the most powerful, but at the same time, it's free and you can do it all within your web browser. So look up Construct. It has visual scripting in some way, and it's easy to learn. Then there's GameMaker Studio. This is a little more intense, but still uses visual scripting. If you want to take it to the next level after you've like learned a little bit, I think GameMaker is a good way to do that. Primarily if you want to do two-dimensional games. Then there's Godot, which is a free engine. It's still being developed, but it's very lightweight, super small file size, and you can make like 3D or 2D games and make some pretty impressive stuff with visual scripting. Then there's Unity. This you need to currently modify a little bit to use visual scripting, but a lot of game designers use Unity. It's a really awesome tool. Even non-game designers use it to create phone applications. So like if you have an application on your phone, you probably have used the Unity app that somebody's made. They use a lot for VR as well as most 3D games, as well as 2D games. And it's free as well. Then there's Unreal Engine. This is what I primarily use just because the visual scripting is the most powerful as well as easy to understand. A lot of like large companies use Unreal Engine. This is entirely free. You only owe them money if you go after like I think it's like 25,000. Like if you make more than $25,000, you start actually owing the money. But as an artist, you have really powerful tools that huge studios use that are just as good quality as what you see in like something you would buy at a store, or you would buy on a game console that's like super high-end graphics. You have all those tools in this, and it's all visual scripting, and it's all free, and it's pretty awesome. This is actually what I'm using to program the augmented reality app that the nonprofit's making right now. So that's the presentation. Yay! I know that one was that whole presentation was a little bit longer than I normally would do. This is kind of a test, so it would be really greatly appreciated either if you saw this live or you are seeing this in the archive. If you can go to this link and just give us feedback on like topics you would like to see covered, things that you might be interested in. Just give me feedback, see what I can improve on. Just keep in mind this is like kind of the first time we're doing this. This is a little bit of a test run. Just let us know, and I guess I'll see you next week. So it's been a pleasure. It'll be, I think next week I'll be covering how to convert your actual artwork into 3D objects on your computer, how to use free and paid tools, but mostly free tools to create your stuff in 3D. So if you're a sculptor or even a painter or just work in a medium that is very physical, looking at this, you'll be able to start making your artwork become digital and share it with other people in that way. So until next time, I'm Sam. It's been a pleasure. I hope you guys stay safe and have an awesome time. Yay. Bye.